Gang attacks loner rancher. They freeze when they see the Cherokee mark on his door. The ranch sat quietly in the middle of rolling hills, surrounded by tall trees that swayed gently in the evening breeze. The sun had almost disappeared behind the horizon, leaving a soft orange glow that reflected on the wooden fence posts and the dusty ground. It was a peaceful place, a place where time seemed to move slower. This was the world of a man who preferred solitude, a man who had chosen to live far away from the noise and troubles of town life. His name was Jacob, though few people had ever called him by it. Most simply referred to him as the rancher, the quiet man who lived at the edge of the hills. Jacob's life had always been simple, shaped by hard work and the routines of the land. Every morning he would rise before sunrise, pull on his worn boots and walk out to check on his cattle. The animals knew him well. They would follow him slowly across the pasture, grazing along the way. He knew each one by sight, could tell if one was sick or injured without needing to touch it. His hands were rough and calloused, a testimony to years of tending to the land, fixing fences, and handling the horses. Life was not always easy, but it was honest, and Jacob had learned to value that more than anything. His house stood at the center of the property. It was not large, but it was sturdy and well cared for. The walls were made of timber, the roof patched in places where winter storms had left their mark. On the front door, carved into the wood, was a small Cherokee mark. It was a circle with intricate lines, a symbol that had been in his family for generations. To outsiders, it might have looked like just a decoration, but to Jacob, it was a reminder of strength, courage, and protection. It was a mark his ancestors had left to show that those who lived here were to be respected and that their home was under watchful care. Jacob often spent evenings on his porch, a cup of hot tea in his hand, watching the sky change colors as the sun dipped lower. He liked to listen to the soft sounds of nature, the rustle of the leaves, the occasional cry of a hawk, the distant lowing of his cattle. These were simple pleasures, but they brought him peace. He did not have friends nearby, nor did he seek them. Town life had never been kind to him, and he had learned to rely on himself. He preferred the quiet, and the quiet had become his companion. On this particular evening, Jacob had finished his chores earlier than usual. The cows were fed, the horses watered, and the fences inspected for any weakness that might let the animals escape. He had taken extra care that day, checking every corner of the property, making sure all gates were secure. There had been talk in town about a gang that had been moving around the outskirts of the county, men who stole cattle and intimidated ranchers. Jacob had heard the whispers but had paid little attention. He had his land, his animals, and his routine, and that had always been enough. As twilight fell, a gentle wind carried the scent of pine and earth across the ranch. Jacob stood on the porch, leaning against the railing, his eyes scanning the distant hills. He liked to watch the sky at this hour when the first stars appeared, twinkling softly above the darkness of the land. The world seemed calm, almost untouched. And yet he could not shake a feeling that tonight might be different. There was a subtle tension in the air, something that made the hairs on his arms stand up. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but he had learned to trust such instincts. The house was quiet, except for the soft creak of the wooden porch beneath his feet. Inside, the fireplace glowed warmly, casting flickering shadows across the room. The furniture was simple but functional, much like the man who lived there. There were shelves filled with old books and journals, some handwritten in the careful script of his father and grandfather. These contained stories of the land, records of seasons past, and reminders of lessons learned from those who had come before. The Cherokee mark on the door was not just a symbol of protection. It was a link to history, a sign of resilience and survival through the years. Jacob turned his attention to the cattle once more. He knew each one, their habits and quirks, and could tell which ones were restless. One young calf was lagging behind, its small legs struggling to keep pace. Jacob grabbed his lantern and walked toward it, moving slowly so as not to startle the animals. The lantern cast a warm glow on the ground, revealing the rough textures of the soil, the patches of grass, and the shadows of the trees. He reached the calf and guided it back to the herd, speaking softly, his voice steady and calm. It was a simple act, but it was a moment that reminded him of the responsibility he carried every day. By the time he returned to the house, night had fully fallen. The stars were brighter now, and the moon cast silver light across the fields. Jacob sat on the porch again, the lantern beside him, and sipped his tea. He thought about the world beyond his hills, about the townspeople and the rumors he had heard. He had no enemies that he knew of, but the whispers of the gang lingered in his mind. Still, he was confident in his own abilities. He had faced storms, wild animals, and accidents over the years, always managing to come through. He trusted that tonight would be no different. Suddenly, a sound broke the quiet. It was faint at first, a rustle from the edge of the property, like someone stepping carefully through the underbrush. Jacob froze, listening intently. The wind carried the sound to him, and he could make out multiple footsteps, deliberate and cautious. He did not panic. Instead, he observed. His hand rested lightly on the railing, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness beyond the fence line. The footsteps grew louder, approaching the house. Jacob could hear whispers, low voices carried by the night air. They were unfamiliar voices, rough and hurried. The gang had come, and they had chosen this quiet ranch as their target. Jacob did not shout or call for help. He did not need to. He had prepared for moments like this, not with weapons or traps, but with the knowledge of the land, his animals, and the strength that ran in his blood. He stepped inside for a moment, retrieving a lantern and keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The warm light of the lantern cast long shadows on the porch as he stepped back outside. The figures were close now, just at the edge of the tree line. They had not seen him fully yet, but their confidence was evident. They thought he would be an easy target, a man who lived alone and had no protection beyond his walls. Jacob's eyes drifted to the door, to the Cherokee mark carved into the wood. It glowed softly in the lantern light, a silent warning. To those who knew the history, it spoke of courage and protection, of a lineage that did not fear confrontation. To the gang, it would mean nothing. Yet, Jacob stood patiently, waiting, knowing that the first moment of hesitation could change everything. He did not need to act immediately. The mark itself carried weight, a story written in wood and history that would soon be understood. As the wind rustled the trees and the shadows danced across the ground, Jacob took a deep breath. He was calm, composed, ready for whatever might come next. This ranch was his home, his life, and he would not allow anyone to disturb the peace he had built. The night held a quiet tension, the kind that comes before events that are remembered for years. In the stillness, Jacob knew one thing. His solitude had prepared him for this, and the strength of his ancestors flowed through him like a steady river. The rancher took another sip of his tea, his eyes fixed on the dark figures moving closer. He did not panic, did not rush. He had faced many challenges before, and he trusted in his own abilities. Tonight, the quiet life he had cherished would be tested, but he was ready. The land, the animals, and the legacy of his heritage were all on his side. The first chapter of this story was ending, but a new one was about to begin, one where courage, instinct, and heritage would meet danger head-on. Jacob adjusted the lantern, its glow illuminating the porch and the carved door. Outside, the night was full of whispers and movement. Inside, the house was calm, the fire crackling softly. The rancher stood tall, ready for the unknown, fully aware that sometimes the greatest strength is not in force, but in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are and where you come from. Night had fully settled over the ranch, blanketing the hills and trees in deep shadows. The stars shone brightly above, but their light barely penetrated the thick darkness below. Jacob stood on the porch, his lantern casting a warm glow across the wooden boards and illuminating the Cherokee mark on his door. The mark seemed to pulse softly in the lantern light, as if it carried its own quiet energy, a symbol of courage and protection that had been part of his family for generations. From the edge of the property, the rustling grew louder. The footsteps of intruders moved carefully through the underbrush, but the dry leaves and broken twigs betrayed their presence. Jacob's eyes narrowed as he observed the shadows dancing across the field. He did not move quickly, did not make a sound. He had faced challenges before, not men, but storms, wild animals, and the harsh demands of life in isolation. And each one had taught him patience, observation, and the power of quiet strength. The gang of men approached with overconfidence, believing that a lone rancher could be intimidated easily. They whispered to one another, their voices rough and low. "This is it," one of them muttered, trying to sound brave. "We'll take what we want, and no one will stop us." Their confidence filled the air, but it was built on ignorance. They had no idea who Jacob truly was or what the Cherokee mark on his door represented. Jacob listened, noting each word, each pause. The wind carried their whispers clearly to him, and he could tell their movements were deliberate. They had come to threaten, to scare, to steal if necessary. Yet despite their numbers, he felt no fear. His life had been a series of challenges, and he had learned long ago that fear only grew when one acted without thought. Calm and measured, he remained still on the porch, watching, waiting. One of the men stepped closer to the house, his boots crunching on the dry grass. Jacob could see him clearly now, his shadow stretching across the yard in the lantern light. The man carried a small sack, probably to hold whatever he intended to take. Jacob said nothing, made no sudden movement, but his eyes met those of the intruder, steady and unwavering. A flicker of unease passed over the man's face. Something about the rancher's calm presence unsettled him. He whispered to the others, urging them forward, but the hesitation was visible. The leader of the gang stepped into the light, trying to project authority. "We know you're in there, old man," he called out, his voice rough. "Step outside, hand over what we want, and no one gets hurt." There was an edge to his tone, meant to intimidate, but Jacob did not move. He stayed on the porch, his lantern held firmly in one hand, his eyes fixed on the approaching men. The glow from the Cherokee mark caught their attention. One of the younger men stopped in his tracks, squinting at the symbol. "What is that?" he whispered, nudging his companion. His voice carried a mix of curiosity and unease. The mark was simple to the untrained eye, but it had meaning. Legends told of Cherokee warriors who protected their land, who were known for courage, skill, and the ability to defend their homes without hesitation. The young man had heard stories from his grandfather about such symbols, about the strength and respect they commanded. He felt a chill run down his spine. The leader noticed the hesitation and scowled. "Stop staring at the door and move forward," he barked, trying to regain control. But the uncertainty had already spread among the group. The men had come expecting an easy target, a man who would panic or fight weakly. What they saw now, a quiet rancher standing calmly, the protective mark on his door and a presence that seemed larger than his size, shook their confidence. Jacob took a step forward, his voice calm and even. "I know who you are," he said, his words carrying across the yard. "I know what you came for, but this land is mine and I will not allow harm here." There was no anger in his voice, no threat, only clarity and authority. The gang exchanged nervous glances. His tone, combined with the quiet symbol behind him, made them pause. They had underestimated the situation. The man with the sack tried to laugh to cover his fear. "You think you can scare us with that old symbol?" he sneered. But even as he spoke, his confidence wavered. He stepped back slightly, glancing nervously at the door. The mark seemed to radiate a quiet power, and he could not shake the feeling that they were standing on ground that was protected in ways he did not understand. Jacob's calmness did not falter. He had faced worse than these men, and he knew that fear often came from overconfidence. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of the pines and the soil, and the rancher felt a familiar connection to the land around him. His ancestors had walked these hills, protected their homes, and taught him to read the signs of the world. Every shadow, every sound, every movement mattered. He used all of it now. The gang's whispers grew louder, a mix of fear and uncertainty. Some suggested retreat, others urged courage, but no one wanted to be the first to admit their unease. The young man who had noticed the mark finally spoke quietly. Maybe we should not be here," he said. His words were barely audible, but enough for Jacob to hear. The leader frowned, frustrated by the hesitation. He stepped forward, trying again to assert dominance. "We came for cattle and supplies. Step aside." Jacob did not move. He let the silence stretch between them, letting his presence speak. He was a man who had lived alone in this land for years, who understood every inch of his property, who had survived storms, wild animals, and the harshness of the frontier. His confidence was not loud or aggressive, but it was absolute. The gang could sense it, and it made them hesitate again. A sudden noise from the edge of the property, a snapping branch, made the gang jump. They had not noticed the small animals moving in the dark. A few deer, a coyote, the sounds of the land that reminded them they were intruders in someone else's world. The leader tried to shake off his unease, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. The Cherokee mark on the door, combined with the rancher's steady gaze and the presence of the land itself, had shifted the balance of power. Jacob spoke again, calm and deliberate. "Leave now. There is nothing here for you if you bring violence." This land is protected, and you will not find an easy victory." His words were simple, yet firm. The gang looked at one another, the tension growing. Their initial plan, full of bravado and certainty, was collapsing under the weight of a quiet strength they had not expected. One of the older men in the group stepped back, his eyes fixed on the door. It's a Cherokee mark," he whispered, almost to himself. He remembered tales his father had told him, stories of men who defended their homes with skill and courage. He could feel the weight of history in that symbol, and it unnerved him. The gang's leader, noticing the hesitation, tried to rally his men, but the doubt had already spread. The night grew colder, the shadows deeper. Jacob's calmness never wavered. He did not shout, did not rush, but he held the space with a quiet authority that made the intruders uneasy. The mark on the door was not magic, but it carried meaning, meaning that spoke of resilience, courage, and protection. The gang had expected fear, but they were met with confidence, experience, and the weight of heritage. Finally, the leader raised his hand, signaling the men to stop. He looked at Jacob, then at the mark on the door, and a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Maybe this isn't the right place," he muttered, his voice tight. The others hesitated, unsure whether to press forward or retreat. The rancher remained still, his eyes never leaving theirs. He understood that the pause he had created was enough. Fear, even quiet fear, was a powerful force. The gang whispered among themselves, tension thick in the night air. The young man who had first noticed the mark shook his head. "We should go," he said again, more firmly. The leader gritted his teeth, frustrated but unable to ignore the unease spreading through the group. Step by step, they began to move backward, their confidence replaced by caution. The rancher's calm and the symbol on his door had done what no amount of threats could. They had made the gang rethink their choices. Jacob watched as the figures retreated into the shadows of the night. His heart rate remained steady, his breath calm. He had not raised a weapon, shouted a threat, or shown aggression, yet the danger had passed. The night returned to its quiet rhythm, the rustling of leaves, the distant cries of animals, and the soft whisper of wind through the trees. The rancher's land was safe once more, protected not by violence, but by presence, awareness, and heritage. As he returned to the porch, the lantern casting warm light on the porch boards and the carved door, Jacob reflected on the encounter. It had been a reminder that strength often comes from stillness, that courage is quiet but unmistakable, and that the past carries lessons that can protect even in the present. Tonight had tested him, and he had passed, not with force, but with calm, observation, and the power of his ancestry. The rancher settled back into his chair, the soft glow of the lantern warming his face. The stars above twinkled, and the world seemed at peace again. Life on the ranch would continue, as it always had, guided by routine, awareness, and respect for the land. The first signs of dawn were still hours away, but Jacob knew the lessons of the night would stay with him, quietly shaping the future of his life and the story of the man who lived alone, yet was far from powerless. The night lingered over the ranch, thick with shadows and quiet. Tension. Jacob stood on the porch, the lantern light flickering across his face, and gazed at the tree line where the gang had paused. He could see the outlines of their figures moving hesitantly, unsure of what to do next. Their earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by a nervous energy that made every step uncertain. The wind carried their whispers, and Jacob could hear them debating in low tones, their voices tight with doubt. One of the younger men leaned toward the older one, pointing toward the door with its carved mark. "Do you see that?" he whispered. "That symbol, I've heard stories about it. My grandfather spoke of men who had this sign. They said anyone with it in their home was dangerous." His voice shook slightly. The older man, who had been trying to reassure the group, nodded silently, his face pale. He had also heard the stories, tales of Cherokee defenders who had protected their homes and land with courage and skill. The young man's words carried weight, and the realization began to sink in that they were not dealing with an ordinary rancher. Jacob remained calm, knowing that the hesitation had already shifted the balance. He did not speak or make sudden movements. Instead, he let the silence stretch, his steady presence and the glowing Cherokee mark speaking volumes. He understood that fear could travel silently, that hesitation could spread quickly, and that a single confident step from him could influence the outcome. The leader of the gang, a man in his late 30s with a rough, weathered face, took a step forward, trying to regain control. "I said step aside," he barked, his voice harsh and demanding. His words carried the force of authority, but Jacob was unmoved. His stance was firm, his gaze steady, and his expression calm. There was no anger, no threat, only quiet certainty. The leader could sense it. He had expected fear, resistance, or panic, but instead, he saw a man who seemed connected to the land, confident in his abilities, and protected by a legacy that demanded respect. The younger members of the gang exchanged nervous glances. Some shifted their weight from foot to foot, others whispered to each other, unsure of what to do. Their bravado had faded, and in its place was doubt. The rancher's calm presence, combined with the mark on the door, created an unspoken power that unsettled them. Stories of the Cherokee defenders had always been part of local folklore, but encountering someone who carried the spirit of those stories was a different experience altogether. Jacob's voice finally broke the silence. "I know who you are," he said, calm and steady. "I know why you are here. This land is mine and it is protected. If you come closer, you will find that courage is stronger than force." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience. He had lived alone for many years, understanding the rhythms of the land, the habits of animals, and the patterns of human behavior. He knew that confidence and clarity could do more than threats or aggression. The leader frowned, frustration clear on his face. He gestured to his men, trying to push them forward. "We don't have time for stories. We want what's here," he shouted, attempting to regain control. But the hesitation had already taken hold. The gang members were unsure of themselves, uncertain whether to obey or retreat. The mark on the door, the calmness of the rancher, and the knowledge that they were on unfamiliar ground made their decision harder. Jacob did not flinch. He had prepared for moments like this, though he had hoped they would never come. His life of solitude had taught him patience and observation. He had learned to read the subtle signs of intention, the slight movements that revealed nervousness or fear. Tonight, those lessons were coming into play. He watched the gang carefully, noticing every twitch, every glance, every whisper carried on the wind. One of the young men stepped forward hesitantly, his eyes fixed on the carved symbol. Maybe we shouldn't be here," he muttered, his voice barely audible. His words were a reflection of the growing doubt within the group. The stories he had heard in childhood, tales of Cherokee warriors defending their homes and families, suddenly seemed very real. The symbol on the door was no longer just wood and carving. It was a message of resilience, strength, and protection. The leader, sensing the hesitation, tried to assert authority again. "Ignore the stories. This is just a man like any other. Step forward," he shouted. But even his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. The gang had expected an easy target, someone who would cower or flee. Instead, they faced a man who stood calmly, fully aware of his surroundings, and whose presence alone seemed to command respect. Jacob's gaze remained steady on them. He did not need to shout, to threaten, or to move aggressively. His calm confidence, the symbol of his heritage, and the experience of living in the land gave him a quiet authority. The gang could sense it. Fear, even quiet fear, had begun to creep into their hearts. The younger members of the gang whispered among themselves, their words filled with doubt and unease. One of them took a hesitant step back, glancing at the others. "We should go," he said quietly, but the leader ignored him. The older man muttered under his breath, "We're not ready for this. We underestimated him." The tension in the night was palpable. Jacob understood the power of hesitation. He let the silence stretch, letting their uncertainty grow. His ancestors had taught him the value of presence, of waiting, of letting the other side make the first mistake. The wind carried their whispers to him, and he could sense the fear building. The gang had come with plans of theft and intimidation, but those plans were dissolving in the face of quiet authority. The leader, frustrated, took a step closer, trying once more to assert dominance. "We came here for what we want," he shouted, his voice echoing across the ranch. But Jacob's calm did not waver. He held his lantern steady, the glow highlighting the Cherokee mark behind him. The symbol seemed to grow in significance in the dim light, a silent reminder that some forces are stronger than mere threats. The gang members hesitated again. Their earlier courage had been replaced by nervousness, their confidence by doubt. They had expected resistance, perhaps a fight, but not this quiet command. Jacob's presence, the mark on the door, and the history it represented had changed everything. He did not need to raise a hand to defend his land. The warning was already clear. A rustle in the bushes made one of the gang members jump. He glanced around nervously, realizing how exposed they were. The night had shifted, and the balance of power had tilted. The young man who first noticed the mark whispered again, "We're not ready for this. Let's leave." His words carried the growing consensus of the group. Jacob spoke once more, calmly but firmly. "Leave now, and no one will be harmed. Stay, and you will find that courage and knowledge are more powerful than threats." His words were simple, but they resonated. The gang's confidence continued to falter. They had come seeking an easy target, but instead, they faced a man whose calm authority and heritage commanded respect. The leader finally signaled the retreat. He glanced at the symbol on the door and then at the rancher, realizing that this was not an ordinary man. He turned to his group and motioned for them to move back slowly. The young man exhaled quietly, relief visible on his face. The older members followed, their unease growing with every step. The gang had come with plans, but those plans were abandoned in the face of quiet courage. Jacob watched them leave, his stance steady and calm. He did not relax immediately. He knew the land could still hold surprises, and he remained vigilant, watching as the shadows of the intruders disappeared into the night. The rancher had faced the threat without confrontation, without force, relying only on observation, calmness, and the silent power of the Cherokee mark on his door. As the last of the figures vanished into the darkness, the night returned to its quiet rhythm. The wind whispered through the trees, the stars shone above, and the ranch seemed at peace once again. Jacob took a deep breath, letting the tension leave his body. The encounter had been a test, and he had passed, not through violence, but through presence, awareness, and the strength of heritage. He stepped back inside, closing the door carefully behind him. The Cherokee mark glowed softly in the lantern light, a reminder of resilience, courage, and protection. Jacob reflected on the events, understanding that sometimes power does not come from force but from quiet confidence and knowledge. The night had shown him that the lessons of the past, his ancestry, the stories of his people, the careful observation of the land, were enough to defend what was his. Sitting by the fireplace, Jacob allowed himself a moment of calm. The wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, the animals slept quietly in their pens, and the ranch was safe. He thought about the gang, about their hesitation, and about the power of recognition and respect. The mark on the door had been more than a symbol. It had been a shield, a warning, and a statement of strength. As the fire crackled, Jacob knew that life would continue as it always had. The ranch would remain his sanctuary, his refuge, and his responsibility. The night had tested him, but he had emerged unscathed, relying not on anger or aggression but on patience, observation, and the quiet power of heritage. The world beyond the hills might hold dangers, but Jacob had learned that strength comes from knowing oneself and the land, and from honoring the lessons of those who came before. The first signs of dawn had not yet appeared, but the darkness of night was beginning to light. Slightly, shadows still stretched across the ranch, blending the rolling hills and trees into shapes that could be mistaken for moving figures. Jacob remained on the porch, lantern in hand, eyes scanning the edge of his property where the gang had earlier paused. The night had been long, and tension had filled every quiet moment. He knew the gang had retreated a little, but they were still near, unsure, cautious, and watching. Jacob's presence remained calm and steady. He did not shout, did not move aggressively, but the very posture of the rancher seemed to fill the space with quiet authority. He understood that the true measure of strength was not in raising a weapon or making a loud threat. It was in awareness, patience, and the ability to project calm confidence. His life on the ranch, spent alone and attentive to every detail of his surroundings, had trained him for moments like this. The gang whispered among themselves, their voices carried faintly by the wind. The younger members still glanced nervously at the Cherokee mark on the door, the carved lines catching the light of the lantern. Some of them had grown up hearing stories of Cherokee defenders, of men who had protected their homes and families with courage and skill. The symbol was not magic, but it was a message that spoke of a legacy, a warning, and a strength that the intruders could not fully comprehend. One of the gang members stepped forward, testing the waters, trying to regain some sense of control. "We came here for cattle," he muttered under his breath, trying to sound confident. "It's just one man, right? He can't stop all of us." His words were shaky, though, and they were met with uneasy glances from the others. Their earlier confidence had faded completely. The stories they had laughed at when they first heard them now seemed real. The calm man on the porch, standing before the glowing symbol of heritage and protection, was not someone they could easily intimidate. Jacob listened to their whispers carefully, noting every word. His instincts, honed over years of solitude and observation, told him that hesitation had taken root. The gang was uncertain. They had come with bold plans of theft and intimidation, but the quiet presence of the rancher and the symbolism of the Cherokee mark had already begun to dismantle those plans. He knew that in situations like this, calmness could be more powerful than confrontation. He took a slow step forward, just enough for the lantern to illuminate more of the porch and the mark on the door. The glow highlighted the intricate carvings, the lines forming a circle that symbolized protection and courage. To the intruders, the mark seemed to radiate authority. One of the younger gang members froze, unable to look away. The stories his grandfather had told him rushed back, the tales of Cherokee warriors, defenders of their land, who never hesitated to protect their homes. Jacob spoke, his voice calm but deliberate. "I will not fight you tonight," he said, "but I will protect what is mine. You have a choice. Leave and nothing will happen. Stay and you will find that courage and awareness are stronger than threats." His words were simple, but they carried weight. They were not a bluff. The rancher had spent years preparing for moments like this, not with weapons or traps, but with knowledge, observation, and calm strength. The gang's leader, frustrated, tried to regain control. "Ignore him," he barked, though his voice sounded less certain than before. "We came here for what we want." But even as he spoke, the hesitation among his men was evident. The fear that had been quietly growing now began to influence the group's actions. They shifted from foot to foot, glanced nervously at one another, and whispered in low tones. Their initial plan, which had seemed so simple and bold, was collapsing under the weight of doubt. Jacob remained still, watching. He understood the psychology of fear and hesitation. Once doubt takes hold, it spreads quickly. A single unsteady step or whispered word could ripple through a group. That moment had come. The young man who had first noticed the mark spoke again, quietly but firmly. "We should leave. This isn't worth it." His voice was a reflection of the consensus forming among the others. They had underestimated the rancher, and they were realizing it now. The leader's face hardened, but he could sense that the tide was turning. He gestured for the men to advance, but none moved. Their earlier bravado had dissolved completely. The calm authority of the rancher, the symbol of heritage behind him, and the quiet vigilance he displayed created a barrier far stronger than any physical defense could have. The intruders were unsure, hesitant, and afraid. Jacob remained steady, his eyes following every movement. He did not threaten or act aggressively. He understood that this standoff was as much about perception and awareness as it was about action. The land itself, the long years he had spent observing it, and the knowledge of its hidden paths and patterns were all on his side. His calm confidence projected more power than the gang expected, and it made them second-guess every step. The wind carried a faint rustle from the trees, a subtle reminder that they were intruders on someone else's land. Jacob could see it in their movements, the small pauses, the nervous glances, the tentative steps backward. Each sign confirmed what he already knew. The gang was reconsidering their choices. Their initial intent to intimidate or steal had been met with an unshakable presence they could not ignore. Jacob spoke again, his voice calm and commanding. "This land is mine. You are not welcome here. Go back now." His words carried the certainty of someone who had lived in the land for years, who had faced storms, animals, and the solitude of isolation. Courage did not come from confrontation alone. It came from understanding, awareness, and the ability to remain calm in the face of uncertainty. The gang whispered among themselves, confusion and fear evident in their voices. Some wanted to retreat, others wanted to push forward, but the overall hesitation was clear. The mark on the door had become a symbol of authority, and the rancher's quiet strength amplified it. Their earlier confidence, which had fueled their approach, was gone. They were caught between fear and desire, and the balance was tipping. One of the intruders finally spoke aloud, his voice breaking the tension slightly. "Maybe we shouldn't do this. He's different. He's not like the others we've faced." The words hung in the air, and the others nodded, quietly agreeing. The leader scowled but could see that the group's resolve was crumbling. The calm, quiet authority of the rancher had outmatched their threats without a single act of aggression. Jacob watched the group carefully, noting the subtle signs of decision. The leader's frustration grew, but it was clear that the men were not willing to continue. They had underestimated the rancher, underestimated the power of his calm presence, and underestimated the meaning behind the Cherokee mark on the door. Each step they had taken closer had been met with a silence and watchfulness that eroded their confidence. Finally, the leader motioned for them to retreat. The men moved slowly backward, their steps careful and hesitant. Jacob did not move. He held the porch, the lantern illuminating the mark behind him as the intruders disappeared into the shadows of the night. The tension gradually released, replaced by the quiet of the land once more. Jacob waited until the last figure had vanished, until only the wind, the rustling leaves, and the distant cries of animals remained. Only then did he step inside, closing the door behind him. The Cherokee mark glowed softly in the lantern light, a silent witness to the night's events. He had faced danger without violence, relying on calm presence, awareness, and the power of heritage. The land was safe once more. Sitting by the fire, Jacob reflected on the night. The gang had come with intent to intimidate and steal, but they had encountered something they could not challenge: quiet strength. The symbol on the door had spoken more powerfully than words or weapons ever could. Stories of the past, of Cherokee warriors protecting their homes, had guided the present, teaching the intruders a lesson they would not forget. As the fire crackled, Jacob allowed himself a deep breath of relief. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the sounds of the night back to their natural rhythm. The ranch was peaceful once again, yet the events of the night left a mark, not on the land, but on the understanding of power, courage, and presence. He had defended his home without confrontation, showing that the quiet strength of knowledge, patience, and heritage could protect even the most vulnerable-looking place. The dawn was still hours away, but Jacob knew the morning would bring clarity. The ranch would continue as it always had, quiet, strong, and resilient. The land, the animals, and the legacy of his ancestors had combined to protect what was his. The events of the night would become part of his story, a testament to courage, awareness, and the quiet power of presence. Jacob sipped his tea, watching the shadows recede, knowing that the land was safe, that the gang had learned a lesson, and that he had emerged not through aggression, but through patience, vigilance, and the steady strength of heritage. The Cherokee mark on the door glowed softly, a symbol of protection and courage that had done more than any force could have. The night had been long, but it had proven a simple truth. Strength often comes not from confrontation, but from calm confidence, awareness, and the quiet courage to stand your ground. The first pale light of dawn began to touch the edges of the hills, casting a soft, golden glow. Across the ranch, the shadows of the night had faded, leaving the land bathed in quiet calm. The air was fresh and cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. Jacob stepped outside once more, lantern in hand, taking a slow walk along the fence line to ensure that everything was in order. The night had been long, tense, and filled with uncertainty, but the ranch remained intact, the animals safe, and the land undisturbed. As he walked, Jacob's mind replayed the events from the night before. The gang had approached with overconfidence, expecting an easy target, a man who lived alone and could be intimidated. Instead, they had encountered calm, focus, and the silent authority of heritage. The Cherokee mark on his door had served not just as a symbol, but as a shield. Its presence alone had caused hesitation and doubt among the intruders, making them rethink their choices. Jacob had known its power, but witnessing its effect firsthand had reinforced the lessons of his ancestors. He checked the cattle first, walking quietly among them, speaking in soft tones as he had done for years. The animals were calm, unaware of the tension that had gripped the ranch only hours before. The young calf he had guided back to the herd the previous evening nuzzled against him gently, a reminder of the simple connections that grounded his life. These were the creatures he had chosen to care for, the land he had chosen to protect, and they remained untouched because of his vigilance and calm presence. Jacob's eyes scanned the horizon. From the hilltops, he could see the distant town, a few roofs barely visible in the morning light. Word would spread slowly about what had happened, about the gang that had approached and then hesitated, about the lone rancher who had stood firm without a single act of aggression. He knew that respect and caution would now accompany his name in the whispers of the town. The Cherokee mark, quiet and unassuming, had spoken volumes. It was a reminder of courage, of awareness, and of the protective strength of heritage. Returning to the porch, Jacob leaned against the railing, taking a moment to breathe and reflect. The events of the night had been intense, but they had also been a reminder of what he had built here. Years of solitude had not been wasted. They had prepared him for challenges that few could imagine. He had learned patience, observation, and the power of calm authority. The gang had come to test him, but they had left realizing that not all threats were visible, not all strength was loud, and not all protection relied on force. The sun rose higher, warming the porch and casting light across the fields. Jacob noticed small details he had often overlooked: the dew glistening on the grass, the patterns of birds flying across the sky, and the movement of his cattle grazing peacefully. Life continued, uninterrupted, as it always had. Yet the night's events had left a subtle mark. They had reinforced a truth he had long known. Vigilance, calmness, and respect for the land and one's heritage could accomplish what force alone could not. Jacob walked inside to the warmth of the fireplace, the soft glow illuminating the room. The carved Cherokee mark on the door seemed to shine in the morning light, a quiet witness to the night's events. He reflected on the lessons embedded in that symbol, lessons of courage, resilience, and protection. The mark had defended more than just the property. It had defended peace, calm, and the very order of his life. He thought about the gang, about the hesitation that had overtaken them, and about the power of perception and respect. They had come with intentions of theft and intimidation, but they had been met with quiet strength and awareness. The rancher had not needed to raise a hand or shout a threat. He had relied on calm observation, knowledge of the land, and the legacy of his ancestors. That had been enough. Jacob considered how easily situations could escalate when people acted without thought. The gang had entered his land expecting an easy outcome, but their choices had been influenced by hesitation and recognition of strength. He realized that the night had not only been a test for him, but also a lesson for them, a lesson in respect, caution, and awareness. It was a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that true strength often lies in quiet confidence and preparedness. After a while, Jacob stepped back outside, letting the warmth of the sun touch his face. He walked to the barn, checking on his horses and ensuring the fences remained secure. The animals were calm, unaware of the events that had unfolded. Their trust in him, built over years of care and attention, had not wavered. He smiled quietly to himself, knowing that his vigilance had protected them, as well as the land he cherished. The rancher sat for a long while on the porch, reflecting on what had transpired. The night had shown him the power of patience, of calmness, and of heritage. It had demonstrated that courage is not always loud, that strength does not always rely on force, and that respect can be commanded without aggression. The Cherokee mark had been more than a symbol. It had been a silent protector, a link to his ancestors, and a reminder of the values that guided his life. He thought about how the night might be remembered by others. The gang would likely carry the memory of hesitation, fear, and respect for someone they had underestimated. Stories would spread quietly in the town, building a reputation for the rancher that was rooted not in conflict, but in calm strength, vigilance, and heritage. The mark on the door would remain a symbol of that lesson, a quiet reminder that some power comes from awareness, presence, and the wisdom of those who came before. Jacob took one last walk around the property before the morning fully arrived. The sun now shone brightly, illuminating every corner of the ranch. The fences, the fields, the barns, and the animals were all exactly as they should be. The world felt calm, balanced, and safe. He knew that life on the ranch would continue as it always had, peaceful, productive, and rooted in respect for the land and its rhythms. Sitting once again on the porch, Jacob watched the cattle grazing, the horses moving slowly, and the birds flitting across the fields. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the land was protected, the animals were safe, and the balance of life remained intact. The events of the night had proven a simple truth. True strength comes from calm awareness, patience, and the courage to stand firm when tested. He looked at the door at the carved Cherokee mark and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The mark was more than decoration. It was history, legacy, and protection. It had served as a silent shield, guiding both the intruders and the rancher toward choices that avoided conflict. It had reminded everyone who saw it that some strength is not measured in aggression, but in calm, steady presence and respect for the power of heritage. The rancher rose from the porch chair, stretching and feeling the warmth of the sun on his back. He walked slowly toward the barn, checking on his tools, supplies, and animals. Everything was in order. The land was peaceful and life was moving forward. He had faced a challenge and had preserved the harmony of his home through vigilance, calmness, and the quiet authority that comes from experience and heritage. As the morning progressed, Jacob began his daily work, repairing fences, tending to the fields, and ensuring that every animal was cared for. The events of the night were still present in his mind, but they did not disturb his routine. Instead, they reinforced the lessons he had always known. Observation, awareness, and calm authority are often stronger than confrontation, and respect can be commanded without force. By midday, the ranch was alive with movement and sound. The animals grazed peacefully, the birds sang in the trees, and the wind carried the faint scent of grass and soil across the land. Jacob paused to look at the horizon, thinking about the night and the power of heritage. The Cherokee mark on the door had proven its significance, protecting the ranch without violence and teaching a lesson to those who would challenge it. The rancher knew that life would continue, with challenges and surprises along the way, but he also knew that he had the tools, the experience, and the calm presence necessary to face them. The night had tested him, and he had emerged not just unscathed, but strengthened in his understanding of the land, his heritage, and the quiet power of presence. As the sun climbed higher, Jacob felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The ranch was his home, protected and respected. The animals were safe, the land was undisturbed, and the lessons of the night would guide him for years to come. The Cherokee mark on the door remained, quietly glowing in the sunlight, a symbol of courage, resilience, and the enduring strength of heritage. Sitting on the porch once more, Jacob reflected on the night, the intruders, and the choices they had made. He realized that true power often comes not from action, but from presence, awareness, and respect. The gang had learned a lesson without violence. He had preserved peace through calm confidence and connection to his land and heritage. And in that quiet moment, the rancher understood that he had not only protected his home, but he had also honored the legacy of those who had come before him, ensuring that the land, the animals, and the stories of courage would continue for generations.